When I saw the previews and those early reviews for South of Midnight, I won't lie, I was kind of nervous. I expected some people not to vibe with it, but even neutral reviewers were more negative than expected. So I wasn't exactly hyped to dive in, but then I did. Compulsion Games and Xbox did send me a review code for South of Midnight, but they haven't seen this video, they didn't pay for it, and definitely didn't write this script. This is all me. The game landed at a 77 on Metacritic, which is actually solid. Let's be real, some $70 games don't even sniff that. And South of Midnight, well, you can grab it for $40 to $50 if you want the premium edition. I want to cut through some of the BS that leaves out the context around this game and figure out, why does everyone hate South of Midnight? Let's start with what I personally loved and then head into some of my criticisms. Firstly, the atmosphere and art direction was incredible. From the insane music to the stop motion animation inside of an otherwise normally frame rated world. There was a lot of care put into this game. What's so cool is that normally when we get folklore, it's typically from a long time period ago like medieval or something mythological like games based in the East. South of Midnight takes American Southern culture and transforms our, yes, I am from Alabama, Roll Tide. It transforms our Southern culture into a playable folktale, and it works. We don't typically see that in gaming or even in media. There's barely any representation for American folklore, let alone the South. I really appreciated this refreshing take on my Southern culture. If you think about media set in America, we have things like Grand Theft Auto or Cyberpunk. We're pigeonholed into this run and gun bag that is still American, but this mix of Southern Gothic and magic realism was fire. The character designs with all the different enemies and bosses, from an island-sized crocodile to a giant owl to a spider woman, it's amazing. They capture something familiar with these characters, but also entertaining and refreshing if you've never been to the South or have any ideas about the folklore, which actually leads me to my next pro, the writing. We'll get to the gameplay later on, but I do want to talk about the gameplay loop. You basically have these areas with monsters, and after you beat them, you get a piece of someone's story as relates to that part of the game. For instance, one of the first stories we get sets the tone for the game's narrative, and it's about a boy named Benji who struggled with his mental health. He was bullied, picked on, and his story unfolds in a way that's honestly dark. It was uncomfortably real. Things that have happened and sometimes still do. It's showing us how life is, not necessarily some fantasy of how life could be, good or bad, and I love that. It's also amazing how these stories are happening in conjunction with Hazel, the protagonist's story. In fact, as we search for our missing mother, we learn more about her and how what she does affects this folklore and mysticism around the town of Prospero where the game takes place, along with other members of Hazel's family, but that's a spoiler, we're not going to talk about it. The game's narrative is so insanely strong that it carries the rest of the game. Literally. I typically say gameplay over story, and I stand by that 100%. I don't like novel games and probably will never play one. This isn't that, but it's clear that the game prioritized story, world, and narrative over gameplay, but the gameplay isn't necessarily bad, which brings me to my first criticism. Now, when I saw people saying the gameplay was weak, it was bad, and it really hurt the experience, I was terrified. I got my review code and didn't play the game for 2 whole days because I didn't want a game I wanted to like to be weak in an area I needed it to be decent in. I'm a gameplay first kind of guy. If I wanted a story, I'd read a book. If I wanted cinematic angles, I'd watch a movie. Games are interactive. I need that action to hit. I need decent to good gameplay. So South of Midnight, while it does most everything else fire, does this fairly decently, I guess. I can't think of another word for decent. I don't like the button timing for dodges. The combos are pretty shallow and the enemies feel basic, spongy, and annoying to deal with until you upgrade your skill tree. South of Midnight suffers, if you can even call it that, from being a game that you have to play to be good at. Let me explain. The game starts off with basic combat that just barely scratches an itch. You have a 3 or 4 hit combo and a few pieces of magic that can make your battles a bit more enjoyable. Throughout the chapters of this game, you can find Floof as you explore, and that gives you the points you need to level up your magic and moves. It's light, especially if you're used to massive RPGs, but honestly, it fits the 8 to 10 hour adventure. I went with leveling up my LB, which is this stunning blast that also allows you to do more damage to enemies in this weaved state. It definitely comes in handy for the big boys. I also unlocked a move where holding Y creates this AoE blast that also applies that weave stun state to more enemies, but for a much shorter time. One of my favorite moves though was the left trigger, where you could grapple enemies into you and do big damage and set up combos. You can also do a sort of down smash attack by jumping and then hitting your attack button, and that creates this mini AoE with a damage range. Basically what I'm saying is that there are a lot of options for combat in a game this compact. I was worried about nothing. I wasn't over the moon impressed with the combat, but I wasn't mad. Hot take, but I liked it better than something like The Last of Us, where the main focus was also a great narrative with a side of gameplay that didn't capture me. Not the best comparison, but it's the one you're getting. Back to the level design. Each area is unique and has a lot to offer if you're paying attention. Like the noted detail about these areas and the people who lived here that continue to paint even more of a story. I typically don't explore every area of a house or building inspecting each inspectable item, but I did here. It continued to shape a world I began to fall in love with early on and was infatuated with by the end of the experience. Platforming in these chapters, it's okay. It's not gonna give Mario 64 a run for its money, but once you get into a flow, it's pretty good. Some areas do feel choppy with the platforming, and at the end of every chapter, there's this chase sequence that has absolutely no stakes and feels outright unnecessary. There's actually an option in the game settings to skip these sequences. I didn't hit that because the back-to-back platforming did feel cool once I got into my groove, but if I did another playthrough, I'd be tempted to hit that button. There's also an option to skip combat sequences as well. I can see that for people who want a good story but aren't captivated by the combat. I know exactly who I'd recommend that setting to, a family member, a friend newer to gaming, etc., but I wouldn't recommend that to any of you watching this video. I assume all of you can button mash, dodge, and level up a skill tree just fine. But those are my honest thoughts on the game. It's very gorgeous with a great narrative, serviceable combat, and it's short. They don't drag it or fluff up the game just cuz. At $40 or $50, it's a steal. Game Pass, it's the download, no questions asked. But that's my honest take. Let's see what Twitter and the review streets are saying. So I know Twitter is kind of a cesspool, but I don't know. Let's check it out. This one from Next Gen Nero is pretty interesting. He says, hate to say it, but South of Midnight is just another victim of the Xbox tax. This game is right up there with the best games I've played this year. I don't care what people want from video games anymore. Does no one appreciate dope atmosphere, art style, storytelling, and music anymore? So what I do agree with him is that this is one of the best games that I played this year. It's right up there with him. It's probably my top 3, top 5 so far. But I can't 100% say that this game is a victim of the Xbox tax. There is an Xbox tax. I will admit that some people just look at Xbox games a little bit differently and they don't give them a fair shot. But this, I don't think that this is the Xbox tax. I think there are more glaring issues with the game that cause some of the negativity that we see. And I say issues because some of these things aren't necessarily issues. They're just things that people don't like. Madam Savvy says, I watch with keen interest on where that modern audience is. Didn't IGN give it an 8? Isn't that the rally cry? Why doesn't it have 30,000 players? I thought the studio got a bunch of likes on Twitter. And then she has a picture of SteamDB and it says 433 people in game. I think these numbers are stupid for several reasons. I do like using Steam charts, SteamDB to look at certain PC games. This is an Xbox game and it's specifically on Xbox Game Pass. So if you're looking at the vast majority of players, even if you're looking at the vast majority of players on PC, they're probably going to be playing this on the Xbox Game Pass launcher, the Xbox launcher, whatever. They're not necessarily going to be playing this. And if they aren't playing it on PC, they're playing it on console, and SteamDB doesn't cover those numbers. Do I expect the number to be like drastically, amazingly higher than this? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times as many people in game? No, but this isn't the type of game where I'm looking at how many players are playing the game. This isn't a Fragpunk. This isn't an Apex Legends. This isn't a Monster Hunter where those games are built around multiplayer. This game is a single player narrative, action adventure, super fun game that I don't think that it matters how many people are playing in game. This is just an out of context thing for them to say, hey, there's only 433 people in game. Like, that's stupid. Also, this isn't a AAA game, so it doesn't need AAA game type numbers to be successful. It is a $40 game, $50 with the premium edition. It's a smaller studio. It's AA. They're not looking for tens of thousands of people playing this game at the same time. This isn't a AAA game. We're gonna take a look at a couple reviews on the PC side because that's where I particularly played it. I did play it a little bit on my Xbox over here, but I didn't like it. I'd rather play it on my PC. So we have a 90 coming in from 4p.de. Simple but not boring in terms of gameplay. Captivating but not overwhelming in terms of story. South of Midnight is an atmospheric game that harks back to the old days and transport you into an intriguing fairy tale world that we're now eager to learn more about. The swamp awaits you. I think that's a really good way to put it. It's simple, but it's not boring. It's captivating. The story isn't overwhelming. They give you a lot of story, but they break it up into chunks. It's digestible, even though it is dark. I think that's a really good way to put what the game is. It's simple, but it's not boring by any means. Now, PC Games In gave it a 60, and here's what they had to say. South of Midnight is a monotonous action-adventure game plagued by boring, repetitive fights and boss battles, with a story that loses momentum when it needs it most. Thankfully, its strong characterization, setting, and soundtrack do a lot of the heavy lifting. If you're able to survive the grind, you might walk away feeling satisfied, but you'd be forgiven for calling it quits before the credits roll. So I have a couple of issues about what they're saying. Yes, I think the fighting can be boring and repetitive. Like I said, that's not the strongest part of the game. It's pretty decent, but it's not the strongest part of the game. But the boss battles were actually pretty good. And saying that the story loses its momentum when it needs it most is crazy, because the story and the narrative is the strongest part of the game. So are you saying that that's not good at all? Because like everyone else here is saying that it's good, the combat isn't good, or this thing or that thing isn't good, but everybody's saying the story is pretty amazing. I do agree with having strong characterization, setting, and soundtrack that do a lot of the heavy lifting. The atmosphere, the world, what the game is in itself is super strong, but the gameplay is something that one could heavily criticize, and I call that fair. Also, it's not a grind. It's only 8 hours. It's a grind if it's boring, I guess, but the game is quite short. It's not anything crazy. Now let's take a look at this middling review from Plague UA. The painted style and animations of South of Midnight are undeniably the most striking aspects of the game. Unfortunately, it suffers from the developer's clear focus on visuals and music. Well-designed boss battles can't save the game from repetitive arena encounters and a lack of a real sense of progression. The vibrant and melodic soundtrack enhances some repetitive elements but doesn't fix them. Again, that's fair, that's their opinion. I do agree that their most striking aspect of the game is the music and the animations and the style of it all. Yes, the developers did have a clear and intentional focus on building up this world and telling the story, but I don't think that detracts from what the game is. Yes, the arena encounters can be repetitive and boring, but also those boss battles save a lot of parts of the game as far as combat, in my opinion. All in all, yes, they're right. The boss battles, the world, they can't save the really middling gameplay, but again, it's not as bad as everyone's making it out to be. I thought it was going to be this horrible thing, and it was just like decent. It's just decent gameplay. It's decent combat. If you have Game Pass, you can check out this game right now, and I would 100% totally do that. And if you don't like the game, just come back and leave a comment calling me some sort of insult. I don't care. It's all engagement at the end of the day. But since you're already here, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.